In the darkest hours of World War II, America embarked on a scientific and industrial endeavor so audacious, so consuming, and so shrouded in paranoia that its very existence challenges belief. This was not merely a race to build a weapon. It was a desperate gamble against annihilation, a forced march from the blackboards of university physics labs to the production line of global catastrophe. The Manhattan Project, as it was chillingly codenamed, involved 130,000 people, cost over $2 billion, the equivalent of nearly $30 billion today, and consumed enough power to light a major city, all while operating in total, absolute darkness. It was a fusion of science, industry, and military force unprecedented in history, run by an unlikely partnership that had to defy every established rule of commerce and secrecy. This is the hidden story of the engineers, the spies, the Calyutron girls, and the indomitable, often infuriating military general who built the literal apocalypse in America's backyard, turning sand-swept mesas and quiet Tennessee farmland into secret cities overnight. The race began not with a bang, but with a barely audible whisper of dread. In 1938, in Berlin's laboratory, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann successfully split the uranium atom. News of nuclear fission flashed across the Atlantic, carrying a terrifying implication. If a chain reaction could be sustained, the energy released would make TNT look like a child's firecracker. Jewish refugee scientists, men like Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, who had fled Nazi persecution and understood Hitler's ambition, were galvanized by fear. They knew that if the Nazi regime harnessed this power first, Western civilization itself was doomed. It was this existential terror that drove them to draft a warning, which the most famous scientist of the century, Albert Einstein, signed in August 1939. Sent to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the letter warned of the potential for an extremely powerful bomb. But the American bureaucracy moved at a crawl. It took the sudden, brutal shock of Pearl Harbor in December 1941 to transform the cautious research into a full-blown war mobilization. The project needed a leader who could handle a war of logistics and industry, not just physics. Groves was a man whose personality was as massive as his construction projects. He had just overseen the completion of the Pentagon, the largest office building in the world, in record time. He was demanding, abrasive, obsessive about detail, and utterly convinced of his own competence. He was, to many of the temperamental scientists, a brute, but he was exactly the brute the project needed. When Groves was handed the mandate in September 1942, the project was still an abstract concept. He was told to build a weapon whose very existence was still theoretical, on a budget that seemed insane, with personnel who spoke a different language, that of quantum mechanics, than his military engineers. Groves' first astonishing act was one of supreme confidence. He ordered the immediate construction of 3 massive, interconnected, and utterly secret industrial complexes across the United States. He wasn't going to wait for the scientists to figure out the theory. He was going to build the factories first, betting billions of dollars and the fate of the war that the physics would eventually catch up with his construction schedule. The scale of this construction gamble is what truly defines the Manhattan Project. It was an exercise in creating entire industrialized cities from nothing, each dedicated to a single, hyper-specific step in producing the bomb's fuel. 1. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Site X. Groves needed uranium-235, the rare isotope capable of fission. Separating uranium-235 from the common, unusable uranium-238 is like sifting for one specific grain of sand in all the beaches on Earth. Groves purchased 59,000 acres of isolated farmland in East Tennessee, displacing entire communities and setting up a military cordon. Over the next 3 years, the population exploded from a few thousand farmers to 75,000 workers. This was Oak Ridge, the 5th largest city in Tennessee, yet it appeared on no map and had no civilian government. All addresses were P.O. Box 1663. At Oak Ridge, Groves pursued 3 different, simultaneous, unproven methods for uranium enrichment, betting that at least one would work. The K-25 plant, gaseous diffusion, a colossal U-shaped structure covering 44 acres, the largest building under one roof in the world at the time, designed to push uranium gas through millions of microscopic pores. The process was so complex that the nickel powder necessary for the barrier required its own miniature secret plant to manufacture. Y-12, electromagnetic separation. This facility housed the calutrons, massive cyclotron-like machines used to electromagnetically separate uranium isotopes. The complex required huge amounts of silver. The project needed so much copper for its electromagnets that it would have disrupted the war effort. Groves, with typical audacity, borrowed 14,700 tons of silver bullion, valued at over $300 million, from the U.S. Treasury to use as conductor wiring. The silver was used for 2 years, then meticulously recovered and returned to the Treasury. The operators of the calutrons were mostly young women, many fresh out of high school, referred to as the calutron girls. They had no idea what they were doing. They were told they were operating complex electrical equipment and were simply instructed to keep the machine's indicators within specific ranges. They were essential to the project's success, yet were utterly unaware they were separating the fissile material for the atomic bomb. 2. Hanford, Washington, Site W. While uranium work was grinding forward, scientists determined that plutonium-239 was potentially an easier fissile material to manufacture, but plutonium had to be created in a nuclear reactor. Groves bought 586 square miles of arid land along the Columbia River in Washington state. Here he built the world's first industrial-scale nuclear reactors, massive blocks of concrete and graphite designed to transmute common uranium into the man-made element plutonium. The B reactor was the crown jewel, the first massive reactor of its kind. Its construction was a Herculean feat of logistics. Trains arrived daily carrying specialized graphite blocks and aluminum cladding. The engineering team, led by DuPont, had to solve problems that were literally science fiction, like cooling a reactor that was producing lethal amounts of heat and radiation, and then separating the microscopic plutonium from the irradiated uranium slugs using highly corrosive chemicals, all behind thick concrete walls. The workers at Hanford, like those at Oak Ridge, lived in a surreal bubble, displaced from their families, working 3 shifts a day in the isolation of the desert, knowing only that they were working on a secret weapon for the war. The scientific and design headquarters was arguably the strangest place on Earth, an isolated mesa in New Mexico, 35 miles from Santa Fe, accessible only by a single winding dirt road. Manhattan General Groves's cage for the world's greatest minds. He knew that the only way to manage the eccentric, argumentative, and indispensable scientists was to cut them off entirely. The director chosen was J. Robert Oppenheimer, a brilliant theoretical physicist from Berkeley, with a wide-ranging, often poetic curiosity and a known history of left-wing political affiliations, a fact that General Groves consciously ignored, prioritizing genius over security risk. Oppenheimer's charm, combined with his intellectual speed, allowed him to bridge the vast gap between the theoretical physicists and the military engineers. The scientists and their families, who lived as residents of a secret town known only by the mailing address P.O. Box 1663, struggled with the surreal nature of their confinement. Wives raised children in primitive conditions behind barbed wire, while their husbands secretly worked on a device that could destroy the world. They had military rank but were civilians. They used pseudonyms and cover stories, and their greatest fear was not the Germans, but that the security around their project would somehow leak. The 2 competing designs for the bomb, Little Boy, the gun-type uranium bomb, and Fat Man, the complex implosion-type plutonium bomb, were developed simultaneously. The Little Boy design was so straightforward that the scientists gambled it would work without a test. The Fat Man design, however, required the unprecedented coordination of precisely timed, shaped explosive lenses to compress the plutonium core, a problem so complex that many doubted it could ever be solved. The incredible secrecy surrounding the project was constantly under assault from within. The greatest failure of the Manhattan Project's security was not due to German agents, but to a network of ideological spies feeding information to the Soviet Union, America's nominal ally. Klaus Fuchs, a German-born theoretical physicist working at Los Alamos. Fuchs was a committed communist who believed the only way to ensure a peaceful post-war world was to balance the terror by giving the secrets of the bomb to the Soviet Union. He methodically handed over critical calculations and design schematics to Soviet agents in secret meetings. Ted Hall, astonishingly, the youngest scientist at Los Alamos, was another spy. He was barely 18 years old when he was recruited and began passing detailed information about the implosion design to the Soviets. His identity remained completely unknown until the 1990s, thanks to the decryption of Soviet intelligence cables, the Venona project. David Greenglass and Julius Rosenberg, Greenglass, a machinist at Los Alamos, and his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg, passed on less scientifically crucial but still highly valuable information, particularly regarding non-scientific industrial processes and bomb components, for which the Rosenbergs would later be executed. The sheer volume of critical data passed to the Soviets by Fuchs and Hall meant that the Soviet Union's own atomic project was accelerated by several crucial years, laying the foundation for the nuclear arms race that would define the next half-century. The race to beat Hitler unintentionally became the race to arm Stalin.
By the spring of 1945, the industrial machine that Groves had bet billions on was finally delivering the goods. Sufficient enriched uranium and manufactured plutonium were arriving at Los Alamos. The implosion device, Fat Man, still required a field test. The location chosen was the Alamogordo bombing range in the New Mexico desert, a stark, desolate spot christened Trinity. The anxiety leading up to the test on July 16, 1945, was unbearable. Scientists debated the possibility of the bomb igniting the entire atmosphere. Though calculations proved this impossible, the fear was real. Rain and thunderstorms added to the tension. The light was instantaneous, brighter than 1,000 suns, illuminating the pre-dawn desert with a fierce, blinding white. The shockwave was felt 100 miles away. Then came the characteristic, terrifying mushroom cloud, rising 40,000 feet into the sky. In the bunker, J. Robert Oppenheimer watched the awesome power he had helped unleash and recalled a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." General Groves, ever the pragmatist, simply said, "The war is over." One or two of these things, and the war is over. The success of Trinity was immediately relayed to President Harry S. Truman, who was attending the Potsdam Conference. The knowledge of having the ultimate weapon instantly altered the geopolitical balance, hardening Truman's stance against the Soviets, and cementing the United States' role as the world's preeminent military power. The final chapter of the Manhattan Project played out in August 1945 with the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which forced Japan's surrender and concluded World War II. The secret race to the atomic bomb was an unparalleled achievement of human organization, genius, and a testament to the immense power of American industrial might. It secured a military victory, but simultaneously ushered humanity into the terrifying, irreversible reality of the nuclear age. A legacy built on scientific curiosity, military urgency, and a secret that was, literally, too big for the world.